As most of you will probably know, my name is Richard Dunne. I'm head teacher of a state primary school in Surrey, southwest of London, a school of 500 pupils. And I think that's important because what this message is about is that it can happen anywhere. It's not about some exclusive environment, i.e. something different. It's about trying to do it in the mainstream. I'm delighted to have Natasha Beeby here, who's one of the fantastic members of staff at my school, and Natasha will talk a little bit later about how this approach to learning is embedded in a particular year group, year 6, 10 and 11-year-olds, which is challenging because it's the year of SATs, a lot of pressure in schools, but we think it still can work. So what I'm going to do today is to start with to run through the 7 principles of harmony that have been drawn out of the Prince of Wales's book, Harmony. Then we'll open it up and give you time to either ask questions or just to talk to each other. Then Natasha will talk a bit about the curriculum and the detail, and then we'll have a final Q&A. But please feel free. I mean, this is for you. We're experiencing it. We're in it. The most important thing is that you understand it and respond as you want to. So please ask whatever questions feel right. Good. Okay. So a few years ago, how many now? 2 years ago, I had read the book Harmony, and then I'd read it again and written down lots of notes. And then on the way to an event in Louisville, Kentucky, I thought this book needs to be summarized in some principles that can help learners and help education. So on the flight over to the States, I spent a long time trying to work out what are these principles. And then we shared them, we refined them, we played with them. Of course, they all link together. It's the same thing, but it's just a different dimension of that perspective. So they are guiding principles for education. They're not teaching the curriculum, they're underpinning it and they're informing it, giving a context to all learning. So I'll run through them now with you. The first principle is the principle of the cycle, that we know life works cyclically, and if our children understand the cycles of life in their various forms, then they get a deep sense of this self-sustaining, self-limiting process. And that's really important. We heard from Dame Ellen MacArthur yesterday about the circular economy and that has to be part of the future with finite resources. So the mindset for our children has to be that we live in a world where we are cyclical, we have no waste, we have no throwaway, we have no pollution. That's a pretty big shift, but that's where we want them to be. So to give you an example of it, I referenced yesterday the food dimension. Food is a very good way for us to highlight the cycle. Planting a seed and seeing it grow, which has such awe and wonder anyway. Next slide, please. Nurturing it, watering it, seeing it grow, being part of that process, experiencing it, getting our hands in the soil. The word soil has been so fundamental, hasn't it, to this whole conference. We need our children to feel soil in their hands. The other systems, hydroponics we were just talking about earlier, is fine, but it's not the soil. And there's so much in what you said earlier, Martin. So that's fundamental to the process. And then harvesting. And I was talking to someone yesterday about the importance of harvest festivals as a celebration of food that we've grown together, that we come together as a community. We always do our harvest festivals with our grandparents, and it's such a special occasion to bring those generations together, always special relationships anyway, and celebrate the food that we have grown and harvested. And then feeding it into our food. So as some of you may know from our school, we have what's called family service, so our children serve each other. It's all part of creating community. It's not a cafeteria where children line up with a tray. They serve each other. We have to monitor portion control. And as came through, I hope, strongly yesterday, we are now driving towards becoming 100% organic in our food because we believe that is the right way for our children to eat. So constant shift towards that practice. But as I highlighted yesterday, this closing of the loop is the key to understanding the cycle. We can't just eat food, throw it away, and then forget about it. We have to monitor the waste that we are throwing away. So our year 4s, 8 and 9-year-olds every day monitor and record. It's on our software system in school. They record our food waste, but they're having a conversation with our kitchen staff, building a relationship around food that goes way beyond learning about it in a textbook in a classroom. And then, of course, it goes out onto the soil to start the food growing again. So these are our carrots growing. And what a lovely thing to see that your food waste is enriching the soil to start that process all over again. So cyclical thinking is essential to our children's mindset for a sustainable future. And year on year, we are highlighting different areas of the cycle of the seasons, cycle of the solar system, water, food, carbon, cycles of life, the amazing butterfly life cycle, for example. So this is fundamental to their learning, and one of their 6 half terms of the year is focused every year on the idea of cycle. Natasha will talk about this later, but we do a lovely year 6 inquiry around the Inuit of the Arctic and how their traditional way of life has always tuned into cyclical ways, linking to nature and the seasons, and what's happening as that unravels, that whole climate change issue of the Arctic is changing. So today, one of the things that I want to really highlight is the value of asking our children, what does this mean to you? Because when we ask them, they tell us the most amazing things. Our young people's voice in this, we've heard this in this conference, is essential to where we go. And when we ask them, okay, tell us, what's this all about for you? They say incredible things. And there's the evidence for it. I love the one. Cycles are very important. If we didn't have cycles, we'd be dead. So all the cycles that they're thinking about leading to life and, of course, death and decay. Thank you. So I don't think we're doing well enough in education about really aligning learning to cycles. So when we learn about plants and flowers, when we learn about food growing, we have to do that in the summer months because that's when our food primarily grows. It's ridiculous to do it in January when everything is dormant. We're in a period of restoration and regeneration in the soils and so on. But why are we learning about plants and flowers and so on then? It's not a difficult thing to do, and we just need to step back and realign our learning so that it works with the cycle. That's, by the way, that's the Cosmati pavement in Westminster Abbey, the coronation slab in Westminster Abbey, and it's done by Year 4s with the Prince's School of Traditional Arts, the Order of the Solar System. Beautiful piece of work in the school hall. So second principle is principle of interdependence, that as we know, and it's again a strong message of this conference, that everything is connected, nothing is separate. I actually feel increasingly that it is a right for our children to know that life is connected. All life is connected. Because if they don't understand that, they live separately. Our education system teaches for separateness. It teaches subject-based learning, and it's all separate. One of our teachers is moving to another school. It's a private school near us, very good school. She said, I have 13 lessons every day. One of them is a break, and 2 of them are for lunch, so that's 10 lessons. They're 35 minutes each. Every single one of them is different. How, as a child, can you build a sense of the joined-upness of life when you're learning that? It doesn't make sense. If I could change one thing in education, it would be to shift to a project-based, inquiry-based approach where learning joins together and makes sense. Acknowledging GCSEs and A-levels, but apart from that, that should be the way that we help our children to understand life. So yesterday I referenced the bees, and bees, what an amazing way for our children to learn. Can we just move to the next slide? When our children learn about bees, it's a brilliant moment watching them with their little bee suits zipped up. They're very self-important going to look after the bees. So they go off down onto our field. Next slide. And then they watch with great intent how bees work together, how they're part of this incredible system together. And as I highlighted yesterday, they're incredibly good at seeing, there's the queen, these are drones, these are workers, these are the different roles within this hive. They really understand how there is a role to play for every part of the system. And that's an important message. That's about us as schools valuing our communities, valuing every child in our community and what they contribute. So they see how bees are key to the pollination process. This is a healthy system at work. Through those flowers become fruits. And when we cross-section those fruits, we can see the geometry inside that way. And that this is a wholly interdependent, interconnected system. This is a system working well. So when we're in our school environments, in our work environments, in any working communal group, it's all about relationships, isn't it? Everything is about relationships. So how do we create healthy relationships through this work? And this is spinning off and then jarring up the honey, which we share with our local community. The children get first dibs on it. They can take a jar home. And then after that, we share it with the community. They'll label the jars. It's all joined up learning. And then they share them through what we have, our green stalls, once a half term. I met an Italian man at a market in Florence last summer. He has 150 beehives. And I said to him, so tell me, what have you learnt about bees? 150 beehives, amazing. He said that we know nothing. We know nothing. So we have lots to learn. If every child learnt about bees, what an amazing world we would create. Interesting book that's come out recently. Some of you, I'm sure, will have read it, on trees and the relationship of trees together. I can't remember what it's called. Can you remember? A brilliant book saying that trees work together. They're wholly interdependent. They cooperate. Their soil, their structure in the soil, their root system is helping them to work. Older trees helping younger trees, and so on. They even think that trees on their own, this is one in Patrick's Farm actually, that trees on their own don't live as long because they are lonely. What an extraordinary thing to say about a tree. Tear in the eye. So again, children's feedback on the idea of interdependence. At the bottom it says, ecosystems teach us interdependence. What a great thing to say. Interdependence means everything has a role to play. Nothing is superfluous. And it's true for us as well. Inclusive societies, inclusive schools, valuing everyone for what they can do, what they can contribute, not what they can't do. I'm deeply concerned that even this year in our SATS tests, just over half the children have been told they failed across English and maths. That's not a good message for children at 11 years old. So in terms of our learning, just to give you a sense of that, we teach through inquiries, big questions. All our inquiries are linked to sustainability themes, well-being themes, sometimes about people, sometimes about the world around us. And as they get older, we start to explore further afield. We move out in the world and back in time, but all the time learning what the Egyptians can teach us about living within limits, as they did on the banks of the Nile, what the ancient Greeks understood about learning from nature, learning about oneness, and so on. So how can we link learning together more so that it makes sense for our children? They understand what they're doing. Next slide, please. Third principle is the principle of geometry, this incredible understanding of the order and patterning proportions of nature. Something that the Prince, as you will have picked up yesterday, is deeply passionate about, and rightly so. When we do our Remembrance Day service in Year 6, our children start the week by learning about the poppy radial symmetry. You might know that poppy radii go from 7 to 19. So you can do amazing maths on angle work, looking at different radii, different numbers of radials from the center of a poppy seed head. That's the starting point. So all our learning starts with geometry. And the work that our children are now producing from that is remarkable. and they are seeing the order and patterning of life. So these are diatoms, their molecular structure in water. They teach us, as you may know, the well-being of water. So they highlight for us whether water is well. They also increase in number when water warms up. So they're very good indicators of climate change, but they're also indicators of cleanliness of water. So when our children understand, these are the Victorians ordering these diatoms into a pattern, which they then enlarged for artwork. This is what Year 5 will learn about through their understanding of water and the water cycle. We see this geometry obviously at a macro and a micro level. The planet Earth, 2/3 water and a water droplet. We see this, as I showed yesterday, in this remarkable comparison between Earth and Venus orbiting the Sun, creating a 5-petal flower, and this beautiful little flower here. And we see it in cross-sectioning of fruit and vegetables. So beetroot on the left, persimmon on the right. It's amazing to get children to cross-section food and start to understand that this patterning is there. Thank you. So bee honeycomb hexagons, the hexagon of the snowflake. And all the time they're doing this, they're linking together. We learnt about that last year. Now we're seeing it this year in a different form. This is joining up thinking around the learning. One of the best examples, as many of you will know, is this Fibonacci spiral. And again, it's a great way of linking us. And the Prince's message very clearly again yesterday that we are nature, that what we have in us, in our proportions, are in the world around us. So we see it in curled up ferns, cloud formations, shells, but we also see it in our curled up finger and even in the form of our ear, which although they're different, mine are a little bit bigger, but although they're different, the proportions are that of the Fibonacci sequence. And these proportions go up our arm and in our body. So children can go, gosh, there's a Fibonacci spiral. It's the same spiral as my ear. Isn't that amazing? And they're 6 years old and they're seeing the link. I'm always struck, I mentioned Florence earlier, by the remarkable geometry of Florence. It's such a beautiful city and people from all over the world go there. And one person there said, you know, the geometry of Florence was there before we were reading and writing. It was the way of explaining the patterning of life. And it's so prevalent there and creates such beauty. And I think the outcome of all of this is that when we understand this geometry and this beauty, we feel well. It helps us to feel well. And of course, all of us, we heard earlier in the session earlier about the greening up of spaces to help people to feel well. But when we see these lovely patterns, we just feel good. And equally, when we recreate them, we feel well too. This is a Buddhist mandala done by Year 6 last term? Last term. So that's an 11-year-old child's piece of work, and it's based on an increasing understanding of how to build a pattern around geometry. What we're seeing with our children is that they're much more able to focus, they're calmer, they're more mindful when they do geometry. So geometry is having a very positive impact. We're monitoring it quite closely, but lots of them say how much they love it, don't they? Thank you. So another example, ancient Egypt and the lotus flower, rotational symmetry, which is then put on a plate and painted turquoise with the markings on it. So it's replicating what the ancient Egyptians did using lotus flower patterns. So when could we use this geometry? We've made a commitment now to use it at the beginning of all our learning every week, and it's changing the way that we do things. Principle number 4 is diversity. These two, as you can see, are twins. They're actually triplets, but I haven't got the third one in the picture. They're very clear that they're very different. When you ask them about being triplets, they don't want to talk about being triplets. They want to talk about their own individual character. We know how important it is for young people to grow up with a real sense of who they are and their uniqueness and specialness. But similarly, we need to do the same, obviously, with our food. So growing food in diversity is really, really important. In school, we now have 3 orchards: apple, pear, and plum, and they all have different species, different varieties. So it's not the same orchard, it's not a monoculture. We grow potatoes similarly in the same way. So every class, every year group has a different potato, and it's their special one. Little ones have little potatoes. And we're starting with the help of gardener Darryl, who I mentioned yesterday, to create wildflower meadows with some of our younger children, so that they can see the diversity of flowers in their grounds. It's part of the well-being, and then at the end of the season, they take the flower heads and they crush them and they save the seeds. So leadership is a really interesting element, isn't it, to what we do in education and what we do generally. From what I understand in school, it needs to be about every child seeing themselves as a leader, because it's about who they are and what they believe in. And we are promoting a lot of leadership across the school in different roles that they play to manage our systems. They manage our energy, our water, our food waste, our recycling, our bees, and so on. So again, just a few thoughts from children on diversity. To me, diversity means difference, uniqueness, being special. Thank you. So we need to learn, don't we, as all of us need to learn about our own responses to things. So how do we create diverse outcomes in learning rather than a monoculture where everyone is expected to do the same? Principle number 5 is the principle of adaptation. You will know the incredible work that some people are doing around biomimicry, imitating the brilliance of natural design to create designs that work well for us. So a penguin is brilliantly adapted to its water world, and yet it can come out of water, shake itself down, and it'll be dry. So what is it in its feathers and the system there that can help us to create something, a garment to wear that dries off very quickly when it's wet? But in terms of learning, it's about local. It's about giving our young people a sense of local, a sense of identity with their place. Really lovely to see the work here in Llandovery around linking to community and building that rapport and opening the school to the wider community of people. So church tile on the left, and soups, year 6 soups with our grandparents on the right. All part of learning through local identity. So year on year again, when we help our children to create, to have a sense of their locality and to create work that links to the local, they are buying into local, they're building an identity with the local. They're starting to feel part of their community. And when they do that, they will contribute and give more. The idea of future is very interesting, isn't it? We don't have a subject called the future in learning, but if we did, I wonder what our children would start to design for their future. We talk a lot about the past and the present, but perhaps not enough about the future. So adaptation is very interesting for them. They see it in terms of the world around them, plants, animals, but they also see it in how they need to be, how they work in situations, how they adapt themselves to create successful outcomes. This is deep learning at primary age. Some of my work has taken me further afield. These are children in Ladakh, in the Himalayas, in northern India. And I was really struck by how angry they were that their learning was not relevant to their world. They live in a mountain world, they live in the Himalayas, and yet their learning is not about their world. Their learning about science is all to do with southern India. And they said, we want to know about the ecosystems of our mountains and our traditions here. This is our world. And it's not a big shift, but it can happen to just localize it and make it relevant. Principle 6 is health. And we all know it's been a big theme of this conference that health is essential to all of us. And we all want to be well. Sir Anthony Selden is up there at the back, and I'm sure at the end might say a couple of words or a few words about health and well-being and happiness. It's such an important part of all of this work. At the end of their time at the school, we take our children to Chamonix in the Alps, an inclusive trip. We've just come back 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago. And they learn about what they need to be well, Next slide, please. Individual well-being as a starting point. And it's interesting that beyond the base needs of good food, water, feeling safe, they see well-being as standing up for what they believe in, caring for others, realizing their potential, being creative, having time to think, reflect, pray. This is part of their well-being. They understand that. So are we nurturing health enough in education? But they also look at the world around them. Imagine learning in a place like that. I'm always struck that we talk about learning in terms of schools, teachers, and classrooms. And yet probably most of us have got our best learning in life from being outside of that environment. And the more we do that with our children, the more enlightened they can be. So again, they see the world when it's well as being one where we have happy, healthy communities, we live in peace, food and farming is organic, and when we all grow as leaders. This is not something for the captain of the sports team, it's something for all of us to achieve. But of course there's this health dimension in the elements around us. Patrick on his farm, looking very proud with the silage that's just been cut. We know this idea of healthy soil, and it's key for education to understand the fundamental importance of healthy soil. Similarly, the link between healthy air and energy use. So this is children monitoring energy in school every week to set a standard and reduce the amount of energy we're consuming and to become energy efficient. So when we link energy to pollution and healthy air, then we understand the connection. Healthy water, similarly, all our products for cleaning in school are biodegradable because we don't want any pollution going into our water system. This is a child-led project. So health, again, every year group will take a healthy theme, play when they're younger, looking at body, mind, spirit when they're older. This is an important part of their learning. And finally, oneness. We may all have a different understanding of that. We might see it in terms of a relationship with Mother Earth, in terms of God, in terms of a creator, in terms of a spirit of life. It doesn't actually matter what our perspective is, but seeing that we're part of something greater. As the Prince said yesterday, we are nature, leaf, blood vessels, river system, connecting through things like the geometry, us to the wider world. And in all this idea of learning to live in peace and love, that love is at the heart of all this work, that it is what helps everyone to grow, to feel nurtured, to feel part of the greater system. I showed this picture yesterday, children in a moment of stillness in the outdoors with these incredible mountains around them, having, I think that girl's face is the most remarkable thing of peace at that moment at the beginning of her school day. So how do we do that? How do we nurture this sense of peace and oneness in our children? So aren't these lovely? This is an 11-year-old perspective on oneness. Oneness is living in harmony with everyone and everything. Oneness is about working in unity and diversity. Oneness is being at one with nature. This is very powerful. If we get to record this across more schools, imagine what sort of worldview they will have as they grow up. Project work here at Landover is very exciting. We're starting to build that. Guys, hugely supportive. And Andrea leading the way. Thank you. So let's just have a little reflection. I'm happy for you to ask questions if you'd like to, if you've got some burning questions you'd like to ask. But maybe it would be nice also just for you to have some time to talk amongst yourselves, and then we can come back in a few minutes. Any urgent questions you'd like to ask? One over here. Well, they have to see that they are the leaders of that change and that mustn't go away. You know, it's top down, bottom up, isn't it? They have to be the new generation of change makers, but you're absolutely right, they are in a different system. So I'm always asked this question, what happens when they go to secondary school? We are now starting a project to work at Key Stage 3 on shifting that practice. This is a national project, but localized initially, to see what the impact could be of more of this kind of learning on that system. It's a start, but it's a very good point. We have a long way to go. Now, I think it's more, I would say, less authority and more governors. And I think our governors have been watching this process like hawks to make sure that our standards don't drop. We're in a standards agenda. We know measure is the accountability for all schools in terms of results, so long as the results are good. If the results fall, that's the challenge. I'm sure Tasha will talk about this in a minute, but that's the challenge. If results drop, then they'll go, hang on a minute, this is all very well, but you need to get back to your grammar. So it's a very fine line. We are walking a tightrope with it all the time, if we're honest. Yeah, absolutely. So it's been a steady process. So we were originally doing topics of learning, which were a little bit vague, and we shifted to inquiries, because inquiries are about seeking for truth. And that felt really good, to say, let's seek for truth in this learning. Let's find out this big question. What are we going to find out? What are we really going to understand? So at the end of this week, all the children through the school will reflect on their inquiries and what they've learnt from them and what the principle means to them, which are the quotes you've seen today. So we started by shifting to inquiries of learning. We then said, at the end of this learning, we need a meaningful outcome, not just a measurable outcome. So we created great works. I haven't really talked about them today, but they're a culmination of that learning to celebrate the work that's been done. So inquiries, great works. Then we underpinned with sustainability themes, because we were on the sustainability agenda then, well-being agenda. And then we said, actually, principles of harmony can help us to start to see what is the right way to be. So we, although we've got the sustainability themes, it's more now focused around principles of harmony and inquiries of learning. But in terms of staff, I mean, I'm sure Tasha can add to this. I think we've had good conversations around it. We have time to reflect on it. And they've generally, as far as I can see, readily bought into it, because it makes sense to them. And it doesn't feel like it's too much more. We started doing this geometry, which I think helped people to really tune into it. And I think that was a good starting point. It wasn't as simple as that and as quick as that, but it's been a process. And I think when we talk about it, we're still in an evaluative process. So we're not saying this is how it is. We're asking the question, what is this telling us? So there's no right or wrong with it, which I think is really important. Do you want to just speak about your view?
So I was going to mention this anyway, but I did my teacher training over at Cambridge, and Richard is now working with Homerton College in the Faculty of Education to bring about their idea of learning. And what I found was that everything, again, was disjointed. Nothing made sense. I was teaching a maths lesson on algebra, and then I was going straight into teaching about colons and semicolons and grammar. There was no link, and there was no inquiry. And Richard came to Cambridge, and I got free dinner, and that's why I went. You know, penniless student, yeah, get free dinner. And actually, I arrived early, and Richard and I were chatting. He said, come to the school, come and see what we're about. And I'd gone in probably the busiest week, which is Christmas, because we have to be at the church. We have various we've got choral things going on. And yet there was just this idea of calm and serenity within all this organized chaos. And I thought, well, what's working well here? This is fantastic. And developed, again, a rapport with Richard and went for a job interview. And I can honestly say that not one day of my teaching career, and especially in year 6 with SATs, and they can be really monotonous and boring, every day of my teaching career for the last 3 years has been different. It has been questioned, it has developed, it has been, my own practice has been questioned. Am I doing things right? The children are questioning me, Miss Beeby, can we do this? Can we do, and the answer of course is always yes. Because at the end of the day, if you've got them engaged, you're going to create something wonderful. So it has been a development over the last few years, and we're by no means at an end. This will be another cycle that will go through, and it will change, and that's what's exciting. Because learning is exciting when you're not stifled to a box and have to tick it, which is how I feel anyway, yeah.
It does feel like a battle, if I'm really honest. I'm battling with my chair of governors right now. I was talking to Natasha on the way down because I would like to be enabled to go out more and to have more of an executive role at school. And he's absolutely clear. You either stay full-time or you leave. And I'm saying, but we've got so much richness of practice here, and you're right, if someone else comes in, it could go within 6 weeks. And his view is, well, that's what will happen then. And I'm saying, but surely you can see, I mean, this has taken years to build up. And so many people in teacher training, I'm working with 10 teacher training colleges at the moment nationally, and they're all very interested in it. The Institute of Education, University College London, are keen to trial a project which we're doing in September with Camden schools. So we're going to work with North London schools to see how this could work in a different context. Because you're right, we've got to show what it's like in different places. It can't just be that drop in the ocean. But yes, the more of you that support it, the better. I almost feel like I need a petition from here to take back to my chair of governors to say it's so important. Because I've got a meeting with him tomorrow afternoon, and I know it's going to be a battle. And he's a very strong-willed man, and he's telling me very clearly what he thinks. Yes, so on a different day, I could have talked to you about energy. So we've done a lot of work on energy. You saw in the slide earlier, our year 6s manage our energy. We have 4 main buildings in the school, and all of them have solar panels. And they are able to, what's really interesting is they're able to monitor the amount of energy from the solars that we're generating versus the amount we're consuming. And in the block that Natasha is in, which has 4 classrooms, it costs us £300 a year from fossil fuel main grid energy. And we do have a feed-in tariff, but we generate 3,000. So the children can see the difference, and that's very exciting. So you're absolutely right. Yeah, all part of this thinking.
And just a quick build on that. People haven't come across it. There's a UK finance organisation called Abundance Investments that allow people to put ISAs and pensions into community energy projects. So rather than just funding them direct, you can fund it from ISAs and stuff. So Abundance Investments, worth a look at.
That's very good to hear. I mean, it was interesting. We're just finishing a £3.5 million build, and we created it with solars in, so that it was just part of the build, not an added cost. So we discussed it very early on, and it worked. So you're right, it's key to the message. In terms of the Sustainable Food Trust, it was a really interesting conversation that Patrick and I had around the fact that he's in the world of food and farming. I'm in the world of education. Food and farming is not talking enough in the world of education, and education isn't linked enough to the world of food and farming. So it just made so much sense for us to work together. He's such a great person to work with anyway. And David Cabman, who is my mentor for this work, is also guiding the process so wisely. So the work is really to do a lot of outreach, to talk to trainee teachers, to go to schools, to come here, to work with schools in Camden and other models, to see what's possible. It's also enabling me to go to do some work overseas as well. So I've just come back from Bhutan, which is very interesting because they've had such healthy systems, organic food, happiness culture, and yet they're being undermined so much by a westernized culture. And everything is changing really fast. And they're trying to work out how to create an education system that reminds them of the value of what they had and still have, but mustn't lose. So there's all that lovely opportunity to get out there, and really feels like the important next stage in terms of impact. In terms of the gardener, we've just had a conversation over here about talking through the idea of a funded project potentially, I think I'm right, or certainly how could we creatively look at what would enable schools, more schools, to have gardeners. We all know that teachers are too busy to be coordinating the gardening. But if we could do that through a creative project. My sense generally is that there are people out there who want to invest in visionary work. And we need to find those people and have great conversations with them. And then they, I'm sure, will want to support that. It's what we're starting to see with this work. Great. So I'll just hand over to Natasha. As she has said, she came to Ashley School 3 years ago now, isn't it? And we had a great conversation at Homerton College, and she was interested in the school and came along. And it is a difficult year, Year 6, as those of you in education know, lots of challenges around SATs. But the curriculum that you'll have copies of on your sheets has really helped to add great value. It's a combination. The other lovely link is with Guy at the back, who was the history teacher when Natasha was at school. So lovely link there. Okay, Tasha, over to you.
Thank you. What's been wonderful to experience over the last couple of days is the voice of many coming together with one message. And I suppose that's what I encourage in my classroom. My children question everything. And I think that's really important because they want answers and they want people to be accountable for what's happening around them. But yes, started off training at Cambridge and everything was very structured and too structured, as it were. And there was no freedom. And then meeting Richard was a breath of fresh air, actually. So I'm here today to talk to you about how we make this a reality in the classroom. There's lots of things that we can channel. There are lots of ideas that we can discuss. And how do we formulate that into something that's meaningful for the children? So around the chairs, I've put out some long-term plans. And of course, the long-term plans are all in boxes. So I apologize for that. It should be this big myriad of structural water and everything like this. But yes, just so you know, the flexibility of said long-term plans is there. We're not compartmentalized at all. We can express lots of different things as they come up. And what I've found is that my Year 6 children are profoundly aware of the world around them and what's going on. They have incredible political views. We had a debate about America and the presidency. We've also had debates about the care of children in our country and children that are homeless. We've had debates about the care of animals in our world as well. And if you have a look at our spring term plan, we start with a learning inquiry. Spring, I think, is my favorite term. We look at the development of animals and we start off in Antarctica. So is Antarctica worth protecting? Well, of course, the answer is yes, but why? How should we protect it? What does that mean to protect it? How are we going to do that? How are we going to facilitate it? And we look at the ecosystems and the abundance of life that survive down in Antarctica. And we also look at the political view of the fact that perhaps Antarctica is going to be drilled, potentially for oil, further down the line. Of course, the children are outraged. They begin with this question. And I have an idea of where our learning might go. I have some things, stored, ready. Things that have happened from last year and the year before, ideas that came from the children themselves. And we've developed the curriculum from ideas that have happened before. But a child came to me, Theo, who is wanting to be a vet. But he's not just wanting to be a vet like James Herriot. He wants to travel the world and be a vet. He wants to go and work with elephants in Africa. He wants to go work with elephants in India. He wants to go down to Antarctica and work with orca. And he came across this article in The Week for Juniors, which we get a weekly subscription for. And it was about an orca that had died in captivity. And he came to me and said, Miss Beeby, this is awful. What are we going to do? There are and he'd researched it at home, and of course, they are very good with technology, so they can find information in a moment. And he said, there's so many orca in captivity. What are we going to do? How do we protect them? How do we allow them to be in their own environment and be in Antarctica, where they should be, and around the Arctic, which we then explored later? And from this one article, we managed to express and challenge the children's thinking for 3 weeks for our English. So it wasn't, right, we're going to write a story, here it is, you've got to use speech, you've got to use semicolons, get it done. It was right, here's our question. How will we support the lives of Orca for future generations? Because if they're all captured, they're not going to be there. They're all going to get put away, and they're eventually going to die out. So that was how we started for our English, one of our English sessions. And we made it challenging for the children. So if you're a teacher, you will be aware that we have specific things that we have to teach the children, like, don't know why, subjunctive mood. Anyone heard of it? Yes, so it's all about the use of a modal verb and being desirable for an effect that you want to happen. So that was great. And I said, right, yes, we can wax lyrical about how awful it is that Orca are in captivity. But what's the counter-argument? Why should Orca be in captivity? And they were, oh. You could see their faces. Oh, no, Miss Beeby, we can't think like that. I said, well, you're going to have to, because we're going to challenge you now, because you've got to create this balanced argument, which is a genre of writing that the children have to be aware of, and you've got to create something. So go for it. Oh, the debates, the fallings out, we got emotional, it was great. And what I've found is if you have an emotional link for the children, they are totally brought in. Do I have behavior issues in my classroom? No. Maybe the odd, I will not stand for this idea when we are debating, but no, I don't have any behavioral issues at all, because we can link to this questioning and we can devise a way of allowing their voices to be heard, which I think is very powerful. So that's what we do up in Year 6. And our learning, therefore, becomes integrated, it becomes linked, it connects. And with the idea of the principles of harmony, we then, of course, with the Orca, looked at the Orca themselves. I didn't have one that I could bring in, unfortunately. So it was images and pictures of the Orca, but we looked at their symmetry, we looked at their markings, we looked at the way that their back curves and creates a semicircle. So we were working within the circle and looking at the geometry of the Orca. So therefore, we're linking now math skills as well. Oh, we're looking at symmetry, we're looking at rotation, we're looking at translation, we're looking at all these different things, and they don't even know, which is great. So it's like, oh yeah, look, there's that math skill, we can tick that off on the curriculum, and they're not aware because actually their learning is great and it's really fun. So we're always linking, and actually the ethos in my classroom is a very interdependent ethos, which is one of the principles of harmony. And we can all learn from each other. And the respect in my classroom is fantastic. The children are very mindful. They know who to go to if they need help with, say, an algebra question. Or I know that guy over there knows how to use a semicolon perfectly. I'll go and ask him, see if I can, put that into my writing to make it better. And yes, we're always mindful of the curriculum and data and our SATs results and everything like that. But if we make that learning meaningful, it's always going to have a powerful effect. So I've had a very tricky cohort this year. I've had a lot of special educational needs. And we've had to develop a very clever system of how to help support them get to a pass and not be failing. Because I don't understand why a child can fail. And that's, as Richard said, that's such a horrible message to give to a child that they're failing. You haven't met the expectation of Year 6. You haven't met the expectation of the Key Stage 2 curriculum just because you didn't tick a box in the right way. Yet can eloquently argue why an orca should not be in captivity, which is very powerful. And I wish educators governmentally would come into my classroom. I want them there. I want them to come and see it. I want them to see it firsthand, that actually education is not about being able to do long division and long multiplication, but it's about the application of the skill, which is what we heard about earlier. Yeah. So we're linking, we're always connecting, and the challenges that we've faced, I've emphasised on a few. The main challenge is SATs for year 6. The children have a standardised test at the end of the year, and they're not standardised children. By no means are my children standard. They are educators themselves, they are listeners, they are ambassadors, and they are leaders, which is what I'm going to talk about in a second. And there was a question earlier about, does it have an effect? Do the government say, oh, you shouldn't be doing this? Well, actually, the answer is no, because our SATs results this year were fantastic. Because they had an application of skill, and they were able to learn a skill and then apply it in lots of different ways. So when it came to the SATs papers, a lot of my kids came, was that supposed to be easy, Miss Beeby? I was like, yes, if that's how you feel. It's like, was that, that question about the rotation and the lady falling down and doing a somersault off a diving board? I was like, yes. Well, that was just a full rotation and a half rotation, wasn't it? And didn't we do that when we were doing the poppies and we were just, rotating things around? I was like, yeah. I was like, oh, I got that one right then. So it was really nice. It was really nice. And in year 6, we give them a lot of freedom for their own learning, as you've heard. And they become leaders. I've just got back from Chamonix. Tiffany, the other year 6 teacher, and we both take our classes to Chamonix for 5 days. And our entire learning is on what is around us and the world that we need to protect and look after. And we go and see the ice caves, and we see the Mer de Glace, which is a massive glacier that comes through the Alps near the Aiguille de Midi, quite close to Mont Blanc. And as you walk down these steps down to the ice caves, which of course is a tourist attraction and does have an effect on said glacier, which we discussed at length, walking down, I was like, kids, I can't breathe. But they see the destruction of the glacier from time, and as it's melted, on the side of the mountain wall are plaques to say this is where it was in 1994. This is where it was in 1990. This is where it was in 1986. And they always find their birth year. And they're like, in my lifetime, it has gone down from here all the way down to there, in my lifetime. And they're so acutely aware of the destruction of the world around them. So they are the voice of the new generation. They are the voice that are going to stand up and say, do you know what? What did we do? What did we do to protect our world and make it a better place for our future generations, for our babies and so on? So that's really what I do. I feel incredibly lucky to work at Ashley. There was a moment where I was maybe going to move schools because I live a long way away, which has its own detrimental effect on my diesel bills. But at the same time, I went to this other school and I thought, it's boring. There's nothing linked. There's nothing here. And of course, we've made it work because I don't want to walk away from it because it's so much fun. So much fun. So yeah, that's what I do. And if you've got any questions, please do ask. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Richard, and thanks, Tasha, and that was unbelievably illuminating. I'm going to be saying some comments, I think, in the concluding session, so let me just get it down to 3, and there's so much that one could talk about. The first is that the education system is like it is because it's designed by very binary people who've come through a very narrow education system themselves, where things are either right or wrong, and it's very head-driven, it's not heart-driven, still less soul-driven, and they simply don't get what we're talking about. It's very rare to find anybody in the education system who thinks that what we've heard today is anything other than La La Land and irrelevant. And of course, actually their world is irrelevant, and the world that we've been talking about today and yesterday is what is relevant for the future of our planet. So that's the first comment, and the second is that we must nevertheless be optimistic. And there's a wonderful thinker who many of you will know, an American, Carol Dweck, who talks about the growth mindset as opposed to the fixed mindset. Can I just check that you've all come across Carol Dweck? Hands up those who've come across, and those who haven't come across Carol Dweck. Okay, so about half and half. So, very briefly, Carol Dweck, growth mindset says that many people have this fixed mindset, but the great thing is that the fixed mindset can become a growth mindset. We can learn to think from our hearts, which is what we do, as well as with our heads. We can learn to be open-minded and open-hearted. We don't have to be judgmental and fixed and mean-spirited and short-term, which is what all the powerful people in the world of politics and education and health, many of the powerful people are. They think short-term. They think of their own re-election, their own promotions, their own advancement, their own money. It's a self-centered, short-termist rather than and narrow-minded rather than open-hearted, open-minded, long-term future. So, but the great thing is that, secondly, that we should be optimistic, because we can get there. People will change. They just take time. Often I do a lot with mental health, and one thing I know is that it's when powerful people have had experience in their own lives of depression and other mental problems, or their children or their siblings, that it opens their heart and mind to the fact that they're, come on, isn't this just a problem, pull yourself together, grow up, kind of mentality begins to change, and they grow and they become more fully human. So Carol Dweck has this great expression, you can see it on her TED Talk, which is not yet. So the child who fails SATs, rather than being told they're a failure, they can simply be told, do you know that TED Talk? But not yet, fantastic message. So to all those people in the world in charge of the medical systems, education systems, political systems, one could say, you're failing at the moment, guys, but you'll get there. But you're not yet there, but you'll get there. So we can be optimistic about them. They'll come and see things our way. And finally of all, Richard, of all the things that I've heard today, truly the most odd is your COG, your Chair of Governors. And the not yet, is obviously relevant to them. And I can't help feeling that, a nice little letter, handwritten letter from the POW would just help to get him to see something, different. And failing that, I'll do it, because, you cannot, you have to succeed. The world needs you. And thank you.